Okay, the subject was, why do I consider Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj to be among the greatest Hindu kings of his times? Okay, so Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, as you know very well, appeared in Bharat during medieval period. And it's very interesting that he's not the only Hindu king who was known for his bravery or for his, or for his strategy or whatever. But the most important point that we can speak about Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj was that he was among the few kings of those times who actually emerged victorious and paved the path for his successors who were among the greatest powers of medieval Bharat. So if you look at a comparison, for example, I was watching a documentary of CNN some years back in which I read that when Israel was created in 1948, at that moment of time, very few people in the US had any interest towards Israel. Even the people who were Jewish, as you know, Israel is a Jewish state, right? So even the American Jewish people, a majority of them were not very much enthusiastic or had any special interest in the creation of an Israel state. However, all of that completely changed in 1967, because in 1967, what happened was small Israel, which had an area of below 20,000 square kilometers and a population of just 4 million, was able to defeat powerful Arab kingdoms, Arab countries which were surrounding Israel. So we're talking about Jordan, Egypt, Syria, and these countries. They united to fight against Israel. And even though they were much more larger in size, they had far more people. They had a bigger army on paper. They had in all types of figures. They were much stronger than Israel, and they thought that because Israel is surrounded by us, it has got no natural resources, we should be able to destroy Israel in a very short time. Okay, but what happened? Instead, Israel's Prime Minister Golda Meir, she led Israel to a massive and resounding victory against these Arab countries, and in only 6 days. So it became called as a 6-day war. And since that happened, the interest of Americans in Israel completely got transformed. From no interest, everybody got interested. So everybody likes winners, and everybody likes winners who came from nowhere, right? So it's a very common sentiment. Like, they were nowhere in the picture, and suddenly they emerged victorious, right? It's like saying that you have in class 20 students, and you got 3 students who everybody thinks will come first, but then suddenly the student who was at 19th or 20th, they came first in the exam. So everybody gets interested. Wow, what happened? So this is the story of what transformed American interest in Israel. So everybody likes winners. So the same thing happened with Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Now, before him, the moment that the foreign powers from Arabia, the Muslims, they came to India in the 8th century, you had various Hindu kings like Raja Dahir Sen, Prithviraj Chauhan, and Maharana Sangha, and even the great Vijayanagar Empire. A lot of them, when they were there, they were very powerful during their times, and they were able to tackle the foreign invaders with great bravery and so on. But eventually they collapsed. Eventually they lost out. Okay, so Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj was the exception because he did not. I mean, either him or the people who continued after him, they were able to establish a big empire which continued right up to the British Empire. So Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj was a winner. Everybody likes winners, right? So he came about at a time when Hindu morale had completely broken down. People in India, the common people felt that there was absolutely no scope for our religion or our culture to survive, because it was slow by slow, Muslim power was surrounding the entire country, right from the north to the west, and to the east was almost completely Muslim. Okay, and then when we come down to the south, also besides a few Hindu empires here and there, a majority of the places in the south also was beginning to get Muslim. So Shivaji came about a time when the people's morale had broken down. They couldn't worship their religion. They couldn't follow their culture freely. They were forced to convert to Islam, or they were forced to do things that against their own wishes. So Shivaji came about at that time. The second point about Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj's greatness is that even his own father was working for the Bijapur Sultans. So it was not as if his father had shown him some way. On the other hand, his father himself was working for the Muslims. And a lot of his, his family, like his uncles or his relatives also were working for different Muslim kingdoms. But despite all that, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, as a young kid, as it was correctly pointed out by you two, that he was greatly influenced by his mother Jijabai, who told him stories from Ramayana, from Mahabharat, and different Hindu scriptures. And from that, he got really inspired. And at a very young age, he and his group of followers, they promised before God that they will liberate our dharma. They would liberate our country, and they would protect dharma. They would fight against the foreign invaders and completely vanquish them. So they took up this vow at a very young age that they will fight for Rashtra and fight for dharma. And as it was correctly pointed out by you, that he won his first fort at the age of 16 in Tolna. So it was a very thing that he didn't have any background, because even his own father was working for the Muslims, but yet he stood out. So it's one point to say that a person who's a millionaire, from that, if he becomes a billionaire, it's a great achievement. But imagine if a person has got nothing in his pockets, and from that he becomes a billionaire. That becomes a rags to riches success story. So Shivaji carries forward the same legacy. He didn't have anything with him, but he was able to create an empire from nothing. So that's the second point, which is the ability to create from nothing. The third thing is that Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj was able to inspire so much confidence, was able to inspire so much of leadership and confidence in his ability. So you can find that there were so many of his friends and so many of his people who were working for him. Sometimes they gave up their lives protecting him. If you know about the story of Tanaji Malasure, the one who captured the Siangar fort with the help of giant lizards. So Tanaji Malasure's son was going to get married. And when Shivaji gave the instruction that no, we have to capture this fort, immediately he cancelled the preparations for his son's wedding, and he himself and his son, they immediately led this great battle to capture this fort of Siangar. And in the bargain, both of them lost their lives. So they were able to do anything for Shivaji because they knew that Shivaji was working on the correct path. Shivaji was working for the path of dharma, for the path of Rashtra. And that's the reason why so many of his lieutenants and his colleagues and his friends and associates, they willingly gave up their lives to protect the life of Shivaji, because they knew very well that his mission was absolutely justified. So another point, as you discussed, is the point of strategy. So maybe it's said that Shivaji was the one who invented guerrilla tactics. Some people say that no, even before him, there were other kings who used that tactics. But that's not the point. The point is that he saw very clearly the terrain that he was under. He also saw that his own army was incapable. Didn't have so many men. It would be practically impossible to fight the mighty Mughal army or the other enemies one-to-one. Because if that was done, he knew very well that the army would not be able to win. So he tried to take advantage of the different strategies, the terrain of Maharashtra, the present-day Maharashtra, which is hilly, rugged, and it's got a terrain which is suitable for places where you can hide behind the bushes and so on. So Shivaji utilized that kind of benefit to use the guerrilla tactics to fight the enemy, and in that he proved extremely successful. Even though his army was small in numbers, they were able to fight much mightier Mughal army or the much mightier Bijapur Sultan. And sometimes, to show that he always looked at the bigger picture. So sometimes he would lose some forts, he would lose some territory, but he never lost the goal, which was to completely liberate the present-day Maharashtra and then eventually the entire country from foreign rulers. So he used a lot of tactics and strategy, which thought that, okay, sometimes it looked like he was losing some forts and some territory, but eventually he won back all of them. So that was his ability to be practical with whatever was important for the short term, but for the long term goal was extremely clear. He had absolutely no dispute about it. So even if you look at it in that sense, sometimes we watch Hindi movies in which we see that one actor is able to bash out 10 people at one time, and everybody claps, wow, so good. But as we all know, whatever they show in movies is all myth. It's not really true. But in the case of our religion, we know of so many great warriors who actually fought multiple people at the same time. We look at the great warrior Abhimanyu, who fought with so many warriors in the Kurukshetra battle single-handedly. Then Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj is one great ruler who fought against multiple invaders, multiple foreigners at the same time. For example, he fought with the Bijapur Sultans. He fought with the Mughal army. He fought with the British who were in Surat. He fought with the Portuguese and in Goa and different places. And he also fought with so many other internal enemies that he had. So he and most importantly, he emerged victorious. That's the most important point, that he was able to emerge victorious from all of them. Another very important point that we learn about Shivaji Maharaj is that as also both Shelly and Yashvi mentioned very nicely, that if you look at kings in the Western world, for example, you had a lot of great kings from, let's say, Alexander the Great. You had Napoleon Bonaparte, and so many different kings who were great in their way, right? They built great empires, but they were also very well known for their cruelty towards people. They were very cruel by nature. They were very arrogant, or they really their subjects were really oppressed. So if you look at their rule, they had some good points in that they were able to build a big empire and so on. But if you talk about the part that there was so much exploitation of the people over there, so much of cruelty towards their subjects, that was a very common nature. And among the Indian kings, among the Hindu kings, that was never common. And we can always see this example from Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. He loved his people. The people loved him. He was very popular. He never subjected to his subjects. I mean, he never subjected his people to any kind of hardship or any kind of problem. Wherever it was possible, when he became firmly established as the king, he was very lenient towards the people in all respects. And the second part is that also, even though he was fighting with the Muslims, with Bijapur Sultans and with the Mughals, the Muslim chroniclers of that time, even though they disliked Shivaji because he was defeating their kings and so on, but the Muslim historians of that time accepted and acknowledged that Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj never harmed any mosque or any other Muslim because of his religion. In fact, there's an example. There are two examples to illustrate this point. Once, a copy of the Holy Quran was found in the battlefield, and Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj told his assistant to make sure that the copy of Quran is returned to the mosque honorably. The second thing is that when there was a war, a battle going on, and when Chhatrapati Shivaji's army was able to defeat the Muslim king of that place, so they captured a Muslim princess. And Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, unlike the kings of those days, other countries, honorably returned back the princess back to the kingdom. So he never abused his power in any respect whatsoever. He was great protector of women, which was again not a very common feature that was found in other kings in other countries. Another very important point that we learn from Shivaji Maharaj is that in those days, what happened was, with the advent of the foreign rulers, the Muslims, a lot of our languages started to use a lot of a lot of Arabic words, a lot of Persian words, a lot of words from Turkey and so on. This problem still continues. A lot of the Hindi that we speak today is not really Hindi. It is more Urdu. And this problem is there in many other languages in Bharat also. But in Chhatrapati Shivaji's time, what they did was, under the guidance of his Guru, Samat Guru Ramdas, the language of Marathi, they began to purge all the foreign words from that language. They tried their best to purge and instead replaced it with Sanskrit words. So they tried, you can say, Indianize or indigenize Marathi language using more Sanskrit words. And as I said, during the Muslim rule, the Hindus were not able to follow their religion. So Shivaji gave a lot of charity to temples. He built many temples all over the places he was ruling. He protected the cows, he protected the women, the Brahmins, and so on. So in that respect, also people were able to get back their independence, get back their right to worship their dharma that had been lost during the long Muslim rule. We also learn from Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj that what happened was, before he came in the scene, it was like what happened, because when the foreigners were ruling the country at that time, they used to forcibly convert Hindus to Muslim. Okay, it was a very common feature. So there were many ways that they tackled with Hindus. Sometimes they would allow Hindus to practice their religion, but we had to pay a very, very high tax. So that means just because I'm a Hindu, I must pay tax. But if I'm a Muslim, I don't need to pay tax. Another way was that in some places, Hindus were forcibly converted to Islam. So what Chhatrapati, and the problem was that once they became Muslim, at that time there was so much of orthodoxy. People were so strict that they would not take back those people back to Hinduism. So that means, let's say, for example, one Hindu is forcibly converted to become Muslim. After 10 years, if he has the opportunity, he wants to become a Hindu again, society will say, no, you already became a Muslim, you cannot come back. But during Chhatrapati Shivaji's reign, he encouraged the process of Shuddhikaran. Shuddhikaran means returning back to the Hindu fold from the foreign religion. So he encouraged those people who had become Muslim or become Christian, they could return back to Hinduism if they wanted to. So that was also a very great step that Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj took. And also, as you correctly mentioned, that he was considered as the father of Indian Navy of that time, because before that, not many kings of his period paid any attention to strengthening the Navy. Whereas Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and his trusted generals like Kanoji Angre and so many people, they were able to build a very strong navy for the Maratha rulers. So much so that Kanoji Angre, imagine if you look at the map today, Maharashtra is located in the west, and Kanoji Angre went down all the way to the south and even touched places like even went all the way to Andamans. Andamans, as you can see, are India's outlying islands. So he was able to go. The navy stretched to that extent. So they were big visionaries, and they were pioneers in building up the Indian Navy of the medieval time. So if you look at all of these examples, we can safely conclude that Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj was one of the greatest, if not the greatest kings of his times. And that's the reason why we celebrate his coronation day as Hindu Samrajya Divas. The reason why it is called as Hindu Samrajya Divas is because Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj made no compromise in his goal of establishing the Hindavi Swarajya. That means to build a Hindu nation which will have equal rights for every single subject. And his example was followed by his successors, as correctly mentioned. The Peshwas who came after Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, 3 generations down the line, they were able to build the Maratha Empire, which was almost occupied 70 to 80% of India's territory, present day territory. They even defeated the Afghans all the way in present day Pakistan, which is called as Atak. They went all the way over there. So they were the greatest rulers of that time, and Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj was their inspiration. So the revolutionaries who fought against the British Empire, and even our RSS's founder, Dr. Keshav Baliram Hedgewar, they were all greatly inspired by the life and vision of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Dhanyavad. Close the recording.